All right, today I'm here with my guest, Dr. RaNae Doll, and it's an honor and a privilege to have a medical doctor on the podcast for the first time. So, welcome, Dr. Doll.
Yes, glad to be here, Zach. Thanks for asking me.
So, tell us a little bit about your background and education. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school, and things like that?
Yeah, so I grew up in Minnesota. In a very different part, though, west central, kind of Wheaton, Minnesota, Traverse County, very farmland, flat, no trees, and no ticks, actually, no serious ticks.
Yeah.
And then went to college at NDSU, and then med school at UND, and then I got out of Minnesota for a while. So then went to Texas to Baylor in a combined kind of med peds program. So studied there, and then we came back to practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you did your residency then in Texas, or?
So that was my residency. Yep.
Okay. And for your residency, did you have to kind of do what most people think of as being a real grueling type of deal, where you're in the ER and you're being stretched to the limit and all of that stuff? So you did that kind of stuff in Texas. Yeah.
Yeah. It was grueling. It was great. I mean, the program was intense, and you saw so much. And it was very hospital based, so I actually had to learn a lot of my clinic based medicine on the job. But it was a wonderful experience, and a lot of it it was just medicine. Like, I don't remember a ton of social interactions outside of medicine. And have you heard of the 80-hour work week? So now there's a rule in residency: you can't work more than 80 hours.
Oh.
Yes, and that happened shortly after I finished. So we had no rules.
Right.
We could work forever.
So I got to ask you then, because I hear there's sort of like this debate between sort of the older doctors and the younger generation and stuff about what's good for a doctor, in terms of their education and all that stuff. Where do you weigh in on that, as far as, the old school way of, or let's say the more traditional way of basically just abusing the doctors and having them work for long hours? I mean, not in a bad way, but in a way that could actually come up in a real life situation, versus sort of the, more of like the coddling of them. No, that's kind of what, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying. So where do you come down on that?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. Like, I think there's a fine line between, you have to be ready to practice in medicine and potentially be on call and have some of those sleepless nights. Yeah. But also, patient care and safety is appropriate also, and important. And so being sleep deprived and, our brains definitely don't think and focus well when we're sleep deprived. So I think it was a good idea. I know now that they're a little more lenient for learning purposes, which is also good.
Yeah. In your opinion, is operating at a high degree of, let's just say, accuracy, under intense pressure and sleep deprivation, something that, the ability to do that, is that something that can be learned and practiced and acquired? Or is it really just something where you can either do it or you can't, and then if you can't, then I guess, that would be an issue.
Yeah. I think a little bit of both. I do think that the training in medicine, especially some of those intense programs, does build this kind of resilience and this feeling like, just I can figure out whatever it is, I'll figure it out. But also it allows, the great thing about medicine is there's many different specialties. Yeah. So it also allows for that, like, I do not want to take call. I'll be I don't want to offend anybody. I'll be a dermatologist.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any particular methods that you use to try to stay alert and involved in whatever you're involved in under stressful circumstances?
Yeah, I personally, I do, I do some deep breathing. I just kind of, again, I go kind of back to just kind of going through the steps and being just kind of just knowing that if I do it slowly, I'll get through it, and just think logically. So I do a lot of that subconsciously, I think, but yeah, I do think that you develop tools for those kind of stressful situations.
Yeah. I mean, and you can't make mistakes. I when I think about that, I think of driving while you're sleepy, and just thinking, even if you are starting to get really drowsy when you're driving, you know somewhere in the back of your head that I have to continue to be perfect at this, even though I'm feeling really tired. And
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, it's got to be the same in some ways. So
yeah.
Okay, so you completed your residency,
Yes.
and then you started practicing medicine eventually up here in Park Rapids.
Yeah. Yep. So initially in Grand Forks, long story, but my husband decided he wanted to do medicine as well. So then we went back there for him to go to medical school.
Okay.
And then practiced there, and then just one other place in South Dakota in Spearfish. And then we decided we had a family. We came back here to Minnesota.
And so how long have you been in this area?
Yeah. So now we're about 15 years.
Okay. What are some of the things you like about living and practicing here?
A lot. I mean, I like this size town. I love working with in this size town. I love working with the school and all the different organizations in town. Of course, we love the outdoors. And then just the access to family has been really nice with the kids.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to talk today about sort of the dark side of living up here.
It's a really good point.
And there really is only one wild animal that we really do need to be afraid of in this area. In some places like Montana, they have grizzly bears and things like that could potentially kill you. But around here, there's only one, and it is the hated wood tick, and that's what we're referring to it as, a wood tick, even though that's really just a nickname for one particular kind of tick, right?
Yeah, and to clarify, the wood tick in this part of the nation is pretty benign. It's the deer tick. The deer tick is the bad actor.
Yeah, and so it's my understanding that there's basically three kinds of ticks. There's the dog tick, which is sort of like the larger tick that we call the wood tick.
You got it.
Then there is the Lone Star tick,
Yes.
which is not prevalent up here at all, basically. I don't think we have that up here. And then so just to sort of narrow our focus to the black-legged tick, which is what
we call the deer tick.
We call the deer tick.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is that?
Well, it's as you said, it's one of the ticks in the nation. Ixodes scapularis is the real name for it, and it is one of the bad actors in the nation. It unfortunately carries many diseases, which is why we worry about it. So Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, ehrlichiosis, babesiosis. Now some newer stuff, the Powassan virus is linked to the Ixodes scapularis tick. And the deer tick, the black-legged tick, is actually, just in the western part of America, everywhere, but it really causes troubles in like Minnesota, Wisconsin, the eastern, upper eastern states that have a lot of those specific tick-borne illnesses.
And why is that? Why does it just target those areas and not just other places?
Well, I looked into this a little bit. Some of it is just their life cycle and their hosts. And, humans are just one of the hosts. And these ticks don't necessarily need humans, but they cause troubles in humans, where some of the deer ticks in the south, the human isn't always necessarily the preferred host. And not, in different distributions of the states, the tick carries the disease differently. So we test ticks all the time. We do tick surveillance, and in the southern states we don't have it doesn't carry as much of the Lyme, the anaplasmosis. Interestingly, the dog tick. So that tick is
that's
also
the larger tick.
The larger tick. That's the one all of us get all the time. We just pull it off, throw it away, don't think about it, which for the most part is fine. You don't have to worry about that one typically in Minnesota. But in the southern states, the dog tick carries Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is even scarier than Lyme disease.
Really?
Yeah. So, and for whatever reason, it just does not transmit that, or tularemia is one of the other ones that can carry up in the north. So it's complicated, and but
yeah. So okay, you mentioned the what did you say, Xylodius or
Ixodes scapularis.
Ixodes scapularis.
Yeah.
Okay.
The deer tick.
The deer tick. What is it related to? I mean, aside, just so that because you're using that classification system.
It's an arthropod, so it's related to ticks are related to spiders, but in general, ticks in medicine are one of our vector-borne infections. So ticks, mosquitoes, fleas, but especially ticks and mosquitoes. And ticks really are the major vector-borne issue. Mosquito in our part of the country. I mean, mosquitoes carry lots of bad stuff as well. West Nile up here, malaria, dengue, Zika. The mosquito life cycle is so short, and with Minnesota's weather, we typically just don't have as many tick vector-borne illnesses from mosquitoes, luckily. Now, another story, but with climate change, we're in general, there's a little more worry of how much more of the vector-borne illnesses might come north.
Mm-hmm. Has any of that been borne out by studies or anything like that?
Well, yeah, they're already seeing some shifts in vector-borne illnesses just based on climate change. And some of it is, like right now, I mean, one of the fascinating things about ticks is that it's the prevalence, the incidence is increasing quite a bit. Like if you look back, in the late 1990s to now, we have way more tick-borne illness, and some of that was a good thing. That was reforestation. Like we've been trying to kind of reforest, which increases certain populations that are part of this tick cycle, like deer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you, one of the questions I was jotting down, I think you partially answered it here, was what is unique about the wood tick that causes it to carry these diseases that you kind of rattle off there before, versus like a mosquito? Like, why couldn't a mosquito give a person Lyme's disease, and why could a tick?
Yeah, well, so different vectors carry different illnesses, but yes, like the deer tick and the wood tick, they have about a 2-year life cycle. So it starts with the adult female laying eggs, and then we have the larva, and then the larva each stage has to have a blood feed to go on to the next stage, or it eventually dies.
So that's like 2 to 3 blood feeds per life cycle?
Exactly.
Okay.
So then the nymph, and the nymph is because of its the first blood feed, the nymph frequently does carry disease. And the nymph can and will spread disease to humans. In fact, it spreads a lot of disease to humans. And it's small. It's if you've ever had a deer tick, a nymph deer tick, I mean, they are the size of a poppy seed. So they're dark black. So you can see them, but they of course they like to hide.
Yeah. So when the ticks are that small, and so okay, just so people are aware, if they see a pretty large tick, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying to let it just sit there. Take it off, of course, right? But less to be afraid about, because that's likely a dog tick.
Likely
or
a dog
tick, right?
Exactly.
But now, then you get down to a nymph black-legged tick or deer tick and everything like that, and it's so very small. So number one, how does a person go about detecting these things? And is there any way, to be, I guess, more vigilant? Is there any method of self-searching or whatever that you would recommend to try to look for these things? Because if the naked eye has a hard time seeing them, what can we do?
No, it is true, and they seem smart, right? Because they like to hide. They're just doing what they've evolved to do, but they frequently will try and find some of those little more hidden spots. They love to go under the arms or behind the knees or in the belly button.
Behind the knee. Yep.
They love those spots. So what the CDC recommends is during tick season, especially if you've been out in possibly tick-infected areas, to just start doing tick checks every night. If you miss it one night, hopefully you'll catch it the next night or the next night. And we'll talk about this in a bit, but it does take a while in most of the infections to transmit through this tick saliva. But look in those spots. I mean, look in, and it's hard to look at the nape of your neck, but if you can have a friend, spouse, look at the nape of your neck, that's another spot that they love, especially kids. It's in pediatrics, the kids are small. The ticks just climb right up to the back of their necks and in their hair and in their ears, where adults, it's like they find their spot to feed a little less far up the body. So luckily in adults, they typically don't, they can make it all the way up, but they oftentimes stop to have their meal before they get to the neck.
Okay, so before we got off on that digression, we were talking about the life cycle. Yeah. We were talking about the first stage, which was the larvae. Then the nymph. The nymph, yeah.
And the nymph will feed on small critters, big critters, humans if they find them, and then to the adult. And so this whole cycle tends to take two years with the deer tick and the dog tick, and 2 to 3 years with the Lone Star tick. So they in our winters, they just lay dormant. That doesn't kill them.
Yeah.
And as soon as it's above freezing, it's about 35 degrees, they'll be up and going. So you'll even sometimes find on a nice warm day, you can sometimes see deer ticks walking on snow.
Yeah. Why is it? I mean, you mentioned that like they can survive these winters where sometimes it's in the double digits below zero. And then also they're very hard to kill. Like you can't squish them like you could like a spider or something.
No, they're very tough to kill.
Why is that?
Well, these ticks are hard shelled ticks. There are soft shelled ticks, so they're very hard to kill manually. They also, one time we put a tick in a baggie at the clinic, and we placed bets on how long the tick would live just sitting in this baggie with a little bit of air and nothing else. And it was scary how long that thing lived.
Wow.
It was months.
That is amazing.
So they just don't.
So the one feed can satisfy it for
a long time, and it depends on the tick, but some can go a very long time just on that one feed. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Yeah, and then they're resistant to the severe cold as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I almost think there should be some way that they can study the skeleton or something to use for like engineering or something like that, right? So,
and the mosquito
yeah
does not, and its normal life cycle is short anyway. And then of course we just don't have, luckily, mosquitoes for a big chunk of the year in Minnesota with the temperatures, but they do die.
Yeah. Okay, and then they're just reborn again in the spring somehow. All right, so this life cycle of the tick, it involves 2 to 3 or 3 feedings, one for each stage of its development. How do we recognize I think we touched on it a little bit, but in the larva stage, or in the nymph stage, I should say, they're very small. But how do we recognize an adult deer tick?
Yeah, it's a black-legged tick, so it does have very black legs compared to some of the other ticks. The female, so the size is still the size of the adult female and male. It's usually the adult female that's feeding because it has to feed to lay its eggs. But it's still fairly small compared to like a dog tick, unless it's engorged. But then that engorged look does look kind of different.
Is that when it turns red, kind of?
Yeah,
like,
it can look
orangish.
Yeah, it can kind of it can look red, orangish, and when it's really, really full, if it's really had its blood feed without interruption,
it'll be like a balloon.
Gray.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, what times of year,
Yes.
seasons wise, are we to fear the tick the most?
So mostly May, June, July. In July, because they do like more humid weather, they will kind of take a break and they typically aren't as active late summer, and then they'll become more active again in the fall for these deer hunters. But we've had ticks already. We have. Yeah, we've had ticks already on some of these nice warm days, and people kind of exploring outside. So they're out. But they will start to increase here.
All right, and so what's their natural sort of habitat?
Yeah.
Like where would they be? If one was looking for a tick, where would he or she look?
So the deer tick loves the forest. So it loves the forest, and it likes kind of taller grass, leaf litter. It likes kind of more of a humidish environment. It doesn't like the sun-exposed grass in the yard, luckily. So that is one of our techniques to try and prevent deer tick exposure, is to try and keep your yard mowed, keep the leaf litter down if you can, even try and keep a border between the woods and especially kids' play areas, just to keep the ticks out of the yard. They can't jump, they can't fly. They are very equipped, though, to grab onto you. So what they really like to do is kind of be on a shrub or a tall grass, and they do this thing called questing.
Yeah, I read that term there too, questing.
It's great. It's a great term. Yeah. So questing is when they kind of sit on their hind legs with their front legs kind of up, sometimes even waving, ready to grab on. And they can, they say the studies show that they can feel vibration. They can smell or have some way of kind of sensing people. Some ticks can even like discern shadows, so they can tell when someone's coming. So they it's not just blindly that they're looking for somebody. They oftentimes can tell something is approaching them, and they're not just looking for humans. I mean, deer, small animals,
dogs,
gosh, dogs, yes. And so then they grab on, and then they try and find their place to take a meal.
Yeah.
So some of the other, just super quick, so I don't forget it, because we want people to sort of not get ticks and tick bites. So we've talked a little bit about tick checks. We've talked about kind of keeping your yard, mowed and leaf litter down, and maybe even a border. But it does help to shower or bathe, in about, if you can do it within 2 hours of being outside, it does help get some of those ticks that haven't really locked in to eating yet. Mm-hmm. So showering after, plus you can do a tick check.
They don't like water.
No. Once they're locked in, like once they bite and put their mouth parts and their feeding tube in, and they're hard to get off. Just a shower is not going to get them off.
No.
Or a bath.
You need a tweezer or something.
Tweezers, that's the preferred method by the CDC, is tweezers, and just pull slow and straight up. Like, not a lot of, we don't want them to ingest their infection into you by disturbing them too much.
Right. So I've heard it said before that you basically don't want it to burst or something, like when you're pulling it out. You kind of just want to take it out as cleanly as you can.
Right.
Because if you smush it or something, then you might be pushing the whatever it
could help
venom or
yeah. And it's in the infection is in their saliva, so it's they have their blood meal, but they usually digest their blood meal, which has whatever they've acquired from the mouse or the deer. And then the infection, the Lyme, it's the Borrelia burgdorferi spirochete, that is kind of goes through their saliva. Now, luckily for us, it's not instant. It takes at least a day for them to transmit the bacteria.
Is that because of the quantity of the saliva that needs to be mixed, or?
I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
It's like some chemical stuff that has to happen before they can actually transmit the Lyme disease. And many of the tick-borne illnesses take a while. Lyme is, of course, one of the ones we worry about a lot. So we know that one is at least 24 hours, and sometimes maybe even 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Powassan virus. So one of the viruses we have in Minnesota.
Powassan.
Yeah, like 15 minutes, some of the studies say. So unfortunately, it depends on the organism.
Yeah.
So we can't say just because the tick was on for a tiny little bit that it
you're out of the woods.
Yeah. For most part, yes. We don't worry. 24 hours is a good time to think if I can get that tick off in 24 hours. That's pretty safe. It didn't get a chance to transmit much.
Yeah. Okay. So you do the inspection, and then you discover.
Yeah.
Let's say a person's been out camping or some Boundary Waters or someplace like that where they haven't had an opportunity yet to bathe or do a real self-inspection, like with a mirror and all that. And they discover that they have in fact been bitten by a tick. What should they do?
Yeah. So we do recommend tick-borne prophylaxis with doxycycline. And there's just a few criteria. So like you said, you're camping in the Boundary Waters. So if that tick you think that tick's been on for more than a day, and if you're not sure, we give it out pretty readily.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and with good cause, I think.
Yeah,
too.
and then you also have to have taken. We want you to take that prophylactic dose within a certain amount of time, within 3 days of having discovered that tick. And of course, we usually say, have you been in a high-risk tick area? pretty much all of Minnesota, except for a very small part in the south, kind of western part, doesn't have a lot of ticks. Then we prescribe a one-time dose of doxycycline.
Okay. So anybody who discovers any tick, because I don't know if this is a misconception or not. Maybe you can clear this up. But I've heard people say that, well, you got the tick, it's fine. Just you only have to really do anything if you actually become sick or if you start to see sort of like that ring type of thing.
Well, and not everybody gets doxy prophylaxis because we just have so many ticks.
Yeah.
But it is an option. It is an option, and
so a person could do that.
Yeah, typically we'll typically do that through a phone call. It doesn't have to be a visit for that. But if you don't get the prophylaxis and you just kind of want to see that, you're right. So then for Lyme disease, about 70 to 80% will get the erythema migrans target lesion, and it might be less than that though. I think those are old numbers. And then otherwise you can look for fever, achiness, headache,
chills.
And we haven't talked a ton about other tick-borne illnesses, but Minnesota has plenty of anaplasmosis and babesiosis, and so sometimes they'll have co-infection with Lyme, or you'll get just anaplasmosis, but similar stuff: fever, chills, achy. So if it's tick season and you get that stuff without like a cold symptoms to explain it, 50% of the time, Zach, unfortunately, people didn't even know they had a tick.
Yeah.
Because they're these tiny little poppy seeds.
Yeah. And then they wind up, so that's happened to me a couple of times, actually. One time I didn't realize that I had a tick, another time I did. But I just remember, I'm not the kind of person who gets sick very often.
Yeah.
But that one evening, I felt like I was literally going to die. Like, I was wondering, like, do I need to call the ambulance on myself here? Because it was, like, real hot fever, sweating. And then going between that and then just being so cold that I felt like I couldn't warm myself up without, like, going in the shower. So,
don't ignore that.
I didn't do that. And I went to the doctor and I got the doxycycline, and that cleared it up.
And many times, because unfortunately our testing is, we have good tests, but early on in our tick-borne illnesses, we don't have good tests. So around here, we just know,
just treat, right?
We just it's so often it's tick-borne that we just treat with doxy because it works so well.
Yeah. That's kind of how it was explained to me too by I think it was a PA that had given me that. But he said, well, you could test, or we just treat it. And I was like, well, why would would the treatment? I mean, I understand it's not good to take antibiotics if you don't need them, because then you might be able to develop some sort of immunity to them or tolerance or whatever, so, but at the same time, you certainly don't want these things. So let's start with Lyme's.
Sure.
What is Lyme's disease?
Yeah. So it's a bacteria, and most of the stuff, the ones that I've commented on are bacteria, which is great because antibiotics work for them. And then, babesiosis is a parasite, so we have to use different medications for that. But that's unusual. And then there's just a few of these viral things too now, which we have no medicine for. So it's a bacteria, and we know it well. It has different stages. We know that initial stage is localized, typically to the skin, but starting to get some of those systemic symptoms sometimes, like fever. But sometimes it's just that little bullseye. It's easy if we get the bullseye. We know for sure, and we just can treat. And we know exactly how long and what to treat with. These days, we can give doxy down to toddlers. Littles. We now know that doxy is safe for all age groups, so we don't have to mess around with a different antibiotic as long as they can take doxy because if they don't have an allergy.
Is that a powerful antibiotic? Okay.
Yeah, but it's also very focused too. It's it's specific. It's very good for this. And then if we miss it, so if we miss the localized infection, the bacteria will spread, and then we'll start to see sometimes, well, hopefully other symptoms. So like more rash, like sometimes we'll see multiple erythema migrans, and that's the target. It's the target lesion, but we'll see multiple ones. That means the bacteria spread. Sometimes we'll see neurologic symptoms. Facial palsy is a common neurologic deficit where you get a droopy face. Rarely it can cause kind of a meningoencephalitis. That's a little more scary, and we treat that a little more intensely. And then if we missed that, which happens, especially in kids, they just don't get a ton of symptoms. Then months later, they get a arthritis. It's often I've never seen it anywhere but the knee. So a big swollen knee without an injury in Minnesota is, in kids anyway, is a tick arthritis. So then we treat that, just treat it longer. Yeah.
And I've also heard that if it gets to that point, you basically are living with it for the rest of your life. Is that true?
Well, I think that is a very difficult question, and it kind of depends on who you ask. The CDC says we should be able to kill that bacteria. Sometimes it takes 2 30-day courses, but once you kill that, what's left might just be damage, might be some chronic arthritis because of the damage that the tick caused.
I see.
That there shouldn't be active tick there, active, ongoing infection. But there's a lot of information out there also from kind of, groups that have suffered with kind of chronic Lyme. And, they really do suffer. And they really do look for more to help them. And, I think that's where it's really tough, where the CDC says one thing and they're kind of looking for more. Yeah.
Okay. In the worst case scenario, can Lyme's actually be fatal?
Well, the two places where we worry about that is in the second stage, it can cause a carditis, so it can affect the heart. So we've seen that in some of our foresters. Like they'll come in with all of a sudden a heart block, and they're just beating so slow they're barely able to stay awake. And there's a couple other heart things that can cause. So we really do want to catch those quickly. So and get those treated, because we don't want to mess with the heart. And then the neurologic stuff occasionally can get quite severe. But good and bad, right, about Lyme is most of the time it's not fatal, and it is treatable. Now, if you travel to, say, North Carolina and you get bit by the Lone Star tick and you get Rocky Mountain spotted fever, that one is really scary. I mean, you have to get treatment within a week, or the mortality rate is quite high. So we don't look for that very often around here, just because we just really don't see it. But I think about it when patients go down to North Carolina and Tennessee and in that range.
Did you call that Rocky Mountains?
Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Spotted fever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, Rocky Mountains is Colorado. Yeah.
That's where it was. It's crazy, right? That's where it was first identified, something like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and then now, no, it's mostly the Lone Star tick.
Okay.
That causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever in southeastern states.
And as of right now, we don't have the Lone Star tick in Minnesota or Wisconsin.
No.
Or at least if we do, it's a very small amount of it, right?
Yeah. No, typically this is not the distribution of the Lone Star tick.
Okay.
Can I tell you something very also curious about the Lone Star tick?
Of course, yeah.
So have you heard of alpha gal? Have you heard of this alpha gal allergy, meat
Why
allergy?
does that sound familiar?
Because it's so crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So now there's
this
this Lone Star tick that mostly is associated with the Lone Star tick is people who've been bitten by the Lone Star tick, not necessarily have developed any specific illness, but they can develop this antibody to this it's a sugar molecule, this alpha gal, that is mostly in mammalian kind of proteins, like meats, like
yeah.
They can start to develop an allergy to meats by being bit by a tick.
And isn't it just like it makes it so that the meat tastes terrible or something like that? And
yes, but not always. And so they eat their meat like usual, and it seems like it's not like every single time either, so it makes it kind of confusing. Other things seem to affect
I did hear about
the
that.
allergy,
Yeah.
And then hours later it's called like the midnight midnight allergy. So they hours later, all of a sudden they have just hives, just terrible.
That's really scary.
It's crazy. And right now it's associated with the Lone Star tick, but they are watching to make sure it's not associated with other ticks. So more to come.
Well, yeah, I hope that. I hope we could just keep that Lone Star tick away from here.
Yeah.
But okay, so these other ones that you talked about. Just briefly, sort of like what's, anaplasmosis. What is that?
Yeah, another bacteria, and more of an acute illness, but sometimes quite acute, like hospitalized acute. Like, was yours anaplasmosis, do they think?
They never did a
know.
test.
Yeah, it sounds like it was.
Yeah.
And so just
my dog had it.
Yeah, dogs get all this stuff. Fevers, chills, achy, sometimes GI symptoms. If you do get blood work done, you have typically low numbers. So like the platelets, the white count is low. So it's a hint.
I bet you that's what it was. Yeah.
And then eventually the test would become positive for anaplasmosis if you waited to test, or if you tested about 3 to 4 weeks later. But
okay. And then, I know that, like, they always do the blood work on the dog and stuff like that, and obviously you're not a veterinarian, so I wouldn't expect you. But here's a question I've always thought of, and I've heard people also repeat, which is they can give this medicine to a dog or a cat that's supposed to keep the tick off or stop the tick. Why can't they give that to a person?
I honestly, it is a really good question, and I don't 100% know the answer, but it is. I was watching the CDC webinar once, and the guy in the audience was like, "Why can't we just put the tick collars on our pants?" Like in between the socks and the pants. Why wouldn't that work? And she would not give in. She's like, we don't do that.
Oh, really? Yeah. So she said don't.
She said don't do that. And I'm assuming it hasn't been studied, of course, so they don't really know necessarily on if it could potentially be toxic.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and then the other sort of what do you call it? Like nuclear option that people use, which is that they will soak their clothing in that is it permethrin? Is that what the stuff is?
Yeah.
It's like a industrial strength insect repellent and stuff like that.
Yeah. Now I'm a fan, so I'm gonna tell you.
This is not official medical advice here.
This actually is official medical
advice.
This
is okay.
The CDC is completely okay with this.
Okay.
So the two things that we recommend, of course, we've talked about some of the preventive measures already, but bug spray DEET on the skin and on clothes really is a good repellent.
Okay.
Not a ton of people love to bathe in DEET, though. I get that. So permethrin for clothes works amazing. And you can either buy the permethrin yourself from L&M or Amazon and treat your clothes. How
do you do that?
Yeah. So here's how we do it. I mean, I put it on a hanger and I go outside if it's not windy and I spray it.
Like a diluted solution.
Yeah, it's kind of it comes ready to spray.
Oh,
yeah. You can find lots of ready to go permethrin sprays, and then it dries, and once it dries, it's really pretty inactive with it when it comes to sort of humans wearing it as clothes. You can also, which we do, our family does, you can order clothes that have been treated with permethrin. So a super common, no endorsement here, but one of the most common ones that people use, including the DNR, is called Insect Shield. So I just put my order in for some Insect Shield socks.
Where do you get that from?
It's online.
Okay.
Insect Shield.
Insect Shield.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can also send your clothes to them to treat, and they do put more permethrin on it than you can do by spray. I think they say it lasts for up to, the clothes that you buy from them, I think it's lasts for up to 70 washings. It's kind of crazy, right? But I also saw something where I think if they treat your clothes or if you treat your clothes, it's like not as many, 25 washings.
What about if you just spray it on yourself? How often do you treat it? Once per season or more?
Yeah, I think if you want spray your boots once per season kind of thing would work great. Yeah. No, that one's been studied and approved. That one's safe.
So there's no toxic downside to it.
No, you don't want to put it directly on your skin. If you do it the way that it's designed, it has been studied and it is safe. Okay. So permethrin on clothes or DEET on skin.
Now, and again, I know you're not a vet and we're talking about ticks, but I've heard it said by dog trainers that they will actually spray the permethrin directly on the legs of the dog.
Yeah. Now I can't speak to that.
Yeah, right.
I do know that dogs tolerate permethrin. Dogs tolerate permethrin better than cats. It can be quite toxic to cats. So I would ask your vet about that.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't expect you to know anything about that. I'm just making that comment because we're talking about permethrin, that I've heard it said that they will do that, and I've always wondered, and maybe I'll have to get a vet on here or something to talk about that. But you know,
that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, because I've wondered, because dogs tend to bite their own legs and lick themselves all the time. I was wondering if they're ingesting the stuff, if that can be toxic for them. But I mean, of course, if it's effective against the tick, it's like literally pick your poison, Your poison. So, okay. So
one quick thing about clothes, just because I think I touched on all the preventative stuff I wanted to tell you about, except for, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but so say you're out in your hunting land, or you're going on a hike and you're pretty sure you could have been exposed to ticks. If you take those clothes off immediately when you get home and throw them in the dryer for even just 10-15 minutes, it really can. They do not like dry and hot. It can kill the tick. If you decide you want to wash those clothes, that's fine too. Wash it in hot water and then of course dry it fully on hot. But it's kind of a rule at our house. It doesn't always get followed, but that if you were out in the woods, or you put your clothes right in the dryer and then turn on the dryer. Yeah. That's an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it is. Okay, you mentioned babesiosis.
Yeah, babesiosis. So that one is so unique because that one's the parasite one. Yeah. So that is much more similar to, say, malaria than anything else. So we treat it with malaria type medicines, and so that is one where you could
quinine, or what they call
I think atovaquone is the one I recently used, but yeah, you have to use different, usually a combo too. You have to use two different things, and that one could potentially be transmitted even through blood transfusions. We are worried a little bit of, most of these are vector-borne and not, luckily, I can't pass my Lyme disease to you, right? Like I can influenza. But blood transfusions would be the exception with some of this stuff, especially babesiosis.
And these other ones,
ehrlichiosis,
and Powassan
virus.
And I saw another one here sounded pretty exotic, called Borrelia Miyamoto.
Yeah. So that is kind of a newer one that has been recognized in Minnesota, and a few other places too. But that one, and I think you're saying it right, Miyamori, is more similar to a tick relapsing fever. So there's some of these, not where we are, but there's some of these tick-borne illnesses that cause this kind of relapsing fever. Like every week or two, you'll get a fever. It'll kind of go away, and you're like, I'm fine, and then then it comes back. Oh, yeah. Also treated with Doxy, though.
All right, and so of all of these ones that we've talked about, including Lyme's, the one that is the most problematic for a person is probably still Lyme's, right? I mean,
in this area, for sure. Okay. Except, if you're kind of a little more feeble or ill or immunocompromised. I mean, the anaplasmosis and babesiosis and ehrlichiosis can be rough. I mean, not in my world, in pediatrics, kids do really well with them actually, but in the adult world, we do get several hospitalizations a year. It's kind of like how you felt, but in somebody who's already kind of medically fragile, it can be serious.
All right, and then as far as like the prognosis for a long-term solution to these, have there been any studies on either just a straight up cure or any kind of a prophylactic, anything like that?
So back in, I think it was 1990, I don't quote me on this, but there was for a few years a vaccine, Limerix, for humans, and it worked. It did not stay on the market for a couple of reasons, but one was, at the time, we really, again, our tick incidence has exploded. The CDC just, published a kind of a survey, like, would you be interested in another Lyme vaccine? Would you take it? And it was surprising. Like 60% of people said, yes, I'd be interested in a vaccine. And these days, we have a hard time sometimes promoting vaccines.
Skepticism.
Yeah. So people are really wanting something for Lyme, I feel like. But there was some possibility that it was causing some arthritis, the vaccine. So for a couple of reasons, it fell off the market. So there's two or three currently in studies. One is, I think, Pfizer's got one in phase 3 studies, so that could be an option in the next couple of years. It looks really good. So vaccine is be one thing for people who are open to a vaccine. The CDC, the smart people who kind of try and look at ways to decrease disease, have looked at a lot of options for how to approach their life cycle, and there's been things to try and make it so that mice are vaccinated, so that mice can be taken off the life cycle, and that would dramatically help the incidence. So, I mean, there are possible options out there that are looking to see how we can decrease it without even having to be us doing much.
Okay. Well, do you have anything else to add on the subject of ticks or tick-borne diseases or anything like that?
No, I think, gosh, we hit most of the highlights.
Yeah.
So, in general, I think we kind of get a little bit tick fatigued, right? But it is good if you're out and you think you could be exposed, to do those tick checks and to wear the bug spray or even boots with some spray on them. All of that helps. And then to throw those clothes in the dryer and do the shower. I mean,
to be vigilant.
Just to remember they're there and they're sneaky. And 50% of the time, we know now that you don't find that tick. And sometimes lots of times you're lucky, because not all ticks carry disease, luckily. But there's plenty that do also.
Yeah. The stat I read was that 1 in 3 adult ticks do and 1 in 5 nymphs.
Yeah, I think that's probably true up here in Minnesota.
Okay, so you are a Rotarian.
I
Um,
am.
and you've been in our club for now about 3 years?
I probably 2.
2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that you are involved in is the Dragon Boat team.
Yes, the Dragon Boat team.
So what is that?
The Dragon Boat team is sponsored by the Rotary, and there's many Dragon Boat teams in Minnesota and the upper Midwest here, all across the nation, that practice and compete. Ours is pretty laid back, but we do practice all summer, 3 times a week. We are looking for new paddlers, and no experience required.
Is there any age restriction?
No age restrictions. I do think for the kids, I do believe
Maybe 16 or something.
There was something where you had to like sign a waiver for your kid to compete. So maybe just have to be able to hold on to that paddle and paddle. Yep. So no experience. We'll teach right at practice. And then we go to 2. We've been going to 2 Dragon Boat festivals per summer. One in Bemidji and one up in Superior, Lake Superior area.
And so it's a race. It winds up being a race, and our Rotary Club, I believe, do they own the boat?
We own a small boat. So we own a 10 to 12 person boat if you count the steersman and the drummer. So we own a small boat and we practice in the small boat. And then during the competitions, it's double that size. It's if you've seen those Dragon Boats, they're so amazing. Like 20 people to a team.
20 paddlers and then one drummer and one steers person. And then when do they practice and where?
Yeah. It's been really nice. We've been practicing at one of the Rotarians that live on Fishhook, and so we meet there, and we try and get the practices so people can come based on their busy lives. So 3 times a week. I think it's going to be. I think they changed it though, Zach, but I know for sure Sunday.
Well, if a person wanted to find out the official schedule, where would they look?
Yeah, so we are going to be putting a bunch of posters up soon in the community, so you could look for those. Otherwise, you can go to the Dragon Boat to Rotary's Facebook page,
Park Rapids Rotary.
Yep, and then do we have a Dragon Boat? We have a Dragon Boat page too.
I think there is.
Yeah,
actually,
so if you go to the Park Rapids Dragon Boat, there'll be contact information on there.
Okay.
Yeah. We'd love to have some more paddlers. It's so fun.
Yeah, it's like anything else. And when it comes to sports, the more depth that you can have, the better off you're going to be, because there's there are inevitably going to be cancellations or injuries or things like that, and so it's going to be sort of like the next person up. And you got to have a good solid group so you never run out of people who know what they're doing. Plus, I did it a couple years ago, and I will say it is fun. It's a lot of fun. When you go to the event in Bemidji, well, both events actually, they're all day events. You kind of set up your little canopies, and I think there's barbecuing and
they have
socializing.
They have a lot of activities that the festival kind of lines up. Yep. Yeah, and you're right. Your tent we all bring snacks and visit and watch the other teams race. And as you mentioned, lots of teams are even just looking for paddlers because they don't have enough to fill their boat. So they'll just come around and say, anybody want to paddle? So you get lots of paddling in.
Yeah. And plus it's always fun to go to Duluth in the summertime, right? Okay. Well, Dr. RaNae Doll, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was great.
It was really informative, and I hope that people will take these things and use this information to their benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you'll come back again and talk about something else.
Oh, what? Yeah. We'll think about the next topic.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thanks, Zach.